Our next lecture will be given by two education specialists at the American National Archives, Missy McNatt and Sara Lyons Davis. ההרצאה השנייה תועבר על ידי שתי מומחיות לחינוך בארכיון הלאומי האמריקאי, מיסי מקנאט וסרה ליונס דייוויס. מיסי בריסקו מקנאט היא מומחית לחינוך בארכיון הלאומי האמריקאי נארה בוושינגטון DC, בו היא עובדת מאז יוני 2006. היא רכזת תוכנית יום ההיסטוריה הלאומית ב-DC, מנהלת את מרכז הלימוד על שם בואינג, מעבירה סדנאות למחנכים ולתלמידים, והיא חלק מהצוות המפתח חומרי לימוד. לפני עבודתה בארכיון הלאומי, מיסי לימדה היסטוריה ואזרחות במשך שנים רבות. היא בעלת תואר ראשון בהיסטוריה ואנתרופולוגיה מסוויטברייר קולג' וירג'יניה, ובעלת תואר שני בחינוך עם התמחות בהיסטוריה from College of Notre Dame in Baltimore, Maryland. סרה ליונס דייוויס היא מומחית לחינוך בארכיון הלאומי האמריקאי נארה מאז 2009. היא עובדת במשרד לתוכניות מוזיאליות של הארכיון בניו יורק סיטי. סרה מפתחת ומציגה תוכניות של למידה מרחוק עבור סטודנטים ומחנכים, ומרכזת ועוצרת התערוכות בניו יורק ומקדמת תוכניות שחרור, outreach. סרה בעלת תואר ראשון מסמית קולג' ותואר שני ותעודה מקצועית בהיסטוריה וניהול הארכיונים באוניברסיטת ניו יורק. סרה הרצתה על נושאים היסטוריים רבים, כולל קהילות ילידים בארצות הברית, שיטות מחקר עבור מחנכים וחינוך ואזרחות. שם ההרצאה הוא ליצור איחוד יותר מושלם, חינוך בארכיון הלאומי של ארצות הברית. The name of the next lecture is To Form a More Perfect Union, Education at National Archives. Missy and Sara, over to you.
Well, hello, this is Missy McNatt from I work at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and very, very excited to be with you this morning for us, and I know it's afternoon for you, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity. So Sarah's going to come on and say hello, and you know, we actually use Google Meets all the time, so I'm not as familiar with Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share the screen. I'll let Sara say hello. If we have a blip there, hopefully it will, you know, we'll get through it quickly. So Sara, if you want to say hello, and then I'll share the screen.
Great. Thank you, Missy. And as Missy said, thank you for having both of us today. We're really excited to share a little bit about the National Archives in the United States and what we do as educators. I've been with the archive for about 11 years or so, and I'm just thrilled to be with you all today. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try to share the screen. And let's see. Okay, I think I've got to get out for just 2 seconds and do something else. Let's see. Okay.
We'll talk a little about this in our program, but I think so much of the past few months for all of us has been just adjusting to the new technology and the new opportunities. So,
okay, you set there, Sara?
Yes,
I'm going to move the slides. Okay.
Okay. So we're just going to give a little bit of a background about the National Archives and what we do to begin with. Next slide, please, Missy. So we're going to start with what is the National Archives. You can see here, this is our main headquarters in Washington, D.C. And this building is just off the National Mall. So it's not far from the White House, the Smithsonian Museums, and the U.S. Capitol. Next slide, please. Part of our mission as the National Archive is to provide public access to federal government records in our custody and control. Public access to government records strengthens democracy by allowing Americans to claim their rights of citizenship, hold their government accountable, and understand their history so they can participate more effectively in their government. We really keep this mission statement in mind during our educational programs. In a democracy, as we all know, records belong to the people. And for more than 8 decades, NARA has preserved and provided access to the records of the United States of America. Records help us claim our rights and entitlements, hold our elected officials accountable for their actions, and document our history as a nation. In short, the National Archives really ensures continuing access to essential documentation of the rights of American citizens and the actions of their government. Next slide, please. And we just like to say NARA is the nation's record keeper, and as so preserving that history and making it accessible to the American people. And next slide, please. So a little historical background on us. So in 1934, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed legislation creating the National Archives. In 1935, 120 National Archives staff members moved into this uncompleted building. And you can see here is a photograph of the building during construction. And Congress did establish the National Archives to preserve and care for the records of the US government. Before this, there was not really a standardized records keeping for the federal government. So you'll see pictures of the records being held kind of in various different places depending on the agency, but there was not this centralized location. Next slide, please. The National Archives is run by the Archivist of the United States. This is a political appointment. The Honorable David S. Ferriero is our current Archivist of the United States. He was confirmed for the role in November 2009, having been nominated by President Barack Obama. Mr. Ferriero is the former director of the New York Public Library System. As their director, he had spearheaded the NYPL's connection with Google Books, and he really believes in digitization and access and has helped the National Archives really strive for expanded digitization and access, providing connections to our documents to people all over the world. Next slide, please. And to just give you an idea of our locations, there are over 40 National Archives locations across the nation. So from one building on Pennsylvania Avenue, we now have field archives, and that's where I work. So I work in the New York City office in Manhattan. We have federal record centers, presidential libraries are part of the National Archives beneath our umbrella, National Historic Publications and Records Commission, all different kinds of organizations. And next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what kind of documents we hold. So we maintain 2 to 3% of records created by the federal government. And these are considered the records with continuing historic value. Even with this small percentage, this is over 15 billion, with a B, pages of textual records, maps, charts, really all kinds of things. And these are the workings, these portray the workings of the government. They have long-term research worth or provide information of value to citizens. So usually they follow the life cycle of records, so the process for organizing, storing, and using records. And officials at NARA help documents through this process and do advise with other American federal agencies when they look to us for guidance with federal record keeping. Next slide, please. This is just a brief snapshot of the variety of documents that we hold. So you can see we have patent records, we have documents that show the legislative process. We have treaties, we have photographs, all different kinds of things. And next slide, please. So this is an image of the rotunda of the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. And you can see here, these are the founding documents of the United States, what we refer to as the Charters of Freedom, that are displayed in the cases shown at the end of the room there. Next slide, please. So they include the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, you can see the first page of that here, and the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So while these documents are over 225 years old, they maintain relevance. And the rights and freedoms that are the very basis of an American government is put forth through these records. Next slide. You'll see in this quote from our current archivist of the United States, it's an excerpt from an article that he wrote in June 2020 for the Society of American Archivists. And I really think it highlights the responsibility held by archivists and cultural heritage professionals in working to preserve the past and make it accessible to empower people to know their rights and their history in meeting the moment. And that's a lot of what we do as educators at the National Archives to help students and educators become comfortable with using primary source documents. We do that through a lot of different ways. I'm going to turn it over to Missy to speak a little bit about our exhibits and different ways we connect.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to talk in the next few slides about how we connect with educators, students, and the general public through our in-person exhibits, as well as through our online exhibits, and accessing records through our website and our new, very innovative website, Docs Teach. So on this slide, you see a picture of a part of an exhibit called Records of Rights. And Records of Rights looks at Americans who have sought to fulfill the promise of the Charters of Freedom, the Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights through, struggles, through their work and struggles over the years. The centerpiece of this exhibit, interestingly enough, is one of the 1297 copies of the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta was an inspiration for our Charters of Freedom, for the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And again, this is an in-person exhibit. It's in the David Rubenstein Gallery. It opened in 2013. And the Magna Carta, by the way, is courtesy of David Rubenstein. And but this exhibit can also be found online. So you can access this online if you go to our website, archives.gov, and look for online exhibits. So this exhibit is a permanent exhibit, but not all of our exhibits are. And so the fact that they are online allows our exhibits to have a life much longer than, just the in-person exhibit. So that's certainly one way that we connect. This is and it rightfully hers, American Women and the Vote, is an exhibit that opened in the Lawrence O'Brien Gallery in Washington, D.C. And if I didn't say that the Records of Rights is in Washington, it is also. But rightfully hers, American Women in the Vote, is an exhibit, and the Lawrence O'Brien Gallery is a gallery that changes exhibitions. And rightfully hers commemorates the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Interestingly enough, not all women receive the right to vote because of continuing discriminatory practices, such as poll taxes and literacy tests. And we work very closely. In fact, education and public programs is under the museum's programs at the National Archives. And so we work very closely with our colleagues in exhibits to provide education materials that tell the entire story. So people can come and see the exhibit, the in-person, and this exhibit also lives online as well. So our exhibits are fantastic, but we can also connect with the National Archives through our website. And this is, if you wanted to see, search for records, you would go to archives.gov. You would click on that tab, Research Our Records, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, and it would take you to this page. And to actually search the catalog, you would click on where that red arrow is going, search the catalog. And so we'll take a look at the catalog. And this gives you the search bar. The document behind the search bar changes every time you search, just to let you know. So if you see something different when you search, that's why. And it's actually pretty cool. And we have, so those 15 billion records that Sarah was talking about, and about 95% are described at the series level. So that means that a researcher can go into the archives catalog and determine whether or not we have the records that they are looking for, and also where they are located if they're planning to do in-person research, because not everything is in Washington, D.C. So that's very, very important. But then we have literally hundreds of thousands of our records are digitized on this website, and there is a continuing effort to digitize our records. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, when they'll all be digitized, but that is certainly one of our goals. So in order to search for a record, you would type your term into that search bar and then click that little magnifying glass. So in this case, you can see the term Israel is at the top. That's what we searched for. This search has been refined because just by writing in the term Israel, literally, you know, hundreds of sources came up, results came up. And so that can be a little daunting for someone. So you can, on the left-hand side, it allows you to refine them. And so this search was refined first by archival descriptions just with digital objects. So if that's, we want to find records that are digitized. And then it was refined again by maps and charts. And you can see that that's in the red. You can also refine records by location, and you can refine them by time period. So in this case, we have 50 records that come up, a much more manageable search. So we'll look at one of them. And this is a record that shows the Israel-Jordan Yarmouk Reservoir area boundary dispute. If we were on the website, you could actually enlarge it, and you could see everything very, very clearly. You can also download it. You see that blue arrow at the bottom of the screen. If you clicked on that, that allows you to download it, usually as a JPEG. And so you could print it out. You could share it with someone. A teacher could use it in a classroom if they wanted to use a facsimile of a document. If we, on the right-hand side, there is a gray bar, and if we scroll down with that, we would find out more information about this document. We would find out which record group it belongs to. It's actually from the Central Intelligence Agency, and we'd find out where it's located physically if we wanted to go see it physically. In this case, it's actually in our facility in College Park, Maryland, on the cartographic floor. So again, there's lots of information that we can find out from this. But the other, our other amazing website that we have that is supported by the National Archives Foundation is docsteach.org. And it's a very innovative and creative website that has been around for about 10 years. And honestly, I don't know of any other organization that has one, although somebody will probably pop in and let me know. But this allows educators to create activities or lessons with our documents, or just find documents. And it's really a pretty amazing website. So we can also search for documents here as well. So if you see those three bars at the top of the screen, the menu, if you clicked on that, one of the choices is to search, and you'd search for documents. And again, there's some refinement you could do. You could research by historical era or document type. You can also search to see if that particular document has been used in an activity that a teacher has created. So again, we put in the term Israel, and you can see in this case, not nearly as many documents show up. There are 39 documents. They're all digitized. So DocsTeach has about 10,000 documents in it, and they are the documents that we find that teachers are most likely to use. So this shows the first page of that search. There are these 4 documents show up. And again, if you clicked on any of them, they would enlarge. You could look at them more closely, more carefully, and you would also find out all the information about which record group it's from, where it's located, and you're also given the archives catalog number. And if you clicked on that, that actually takes you right back into the archives catalog if you wanted to search there a little bit more closely. And then photographs. Photographs can be extraordinarily compelling records. I've used them quite often with students, with teachers, and especially with younger students. You know, Andrew was talking about the 6-year-olds. We actually have a preschool program, and you know, these children aren't reading yet. However, they can carefully examine photographs and learn a great deal about them. And so this is obviously, as it says, it's a photograph of Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin greeting each other at the Camp David Summit meeting in Camp David, Maryland. And we see President Jimmy Carter and his wife, Rosalind Carter, looking on. And this particular record is located in the Carter Library and Museum in Georgia, because we do have the presidential libraries. So again, this is teachers can create activities on DocsTeach. They can send them to their students. And in this virtual world, we have found that teachers are doing that a lot more than they ever did before. And the students what they do is, what happens is they receive a URL with the activity. They click on that, they go through the activity, and then they respond to whatever the question is that the teacher created. And it's all based on that analysis and interpretation of documents. And they respond to their teachers. The information comes back in an email to the teacher. So it's really an incredible website. And if you are interested in learning a little bit more about it, how it works, we have recorded webinars that, again, at that on that first page where you go to those 3 bars, one of the choices is to learn more about it. And if you click on that, you'll find these webinars. So if you were to click on any of those, it explains how to do, how to find, how to create activities, and how to set up your classroom, all these kinds of things. And then if you want something that's a little bit different than what you see here, you can actually request a webinar with one of our educators at the National Archives. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Missy. I'm just going to speak a little more about the resources that we have. So in addition to what Missy was saying, we have a wider, diverse offering of educational resources for educators and students. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, educators at NARA offered distance learning programs for students and virtual professional development webinars for educators. We had and have a robust program of standards-based interactive programs based on historical topics and documents in our holdings. Next slide, please. And so you can see just an example of those programs available on our website. My colleagues and I had experience connecting with educators and students, but our student programs were largely facilitated for classrooms connecting together in person. So suddenly the majority of students were learning from home, and we had to review how our current programs and methods of connections could meet this need. In addition to newly homeschooling families, we also had newly presenting organizations. So could the Charters of Freedom attract audiences in the same way as, live animal cams from the zoo and digital programs from their trainers? So the National Archives developed programs to be meaningful pedagogical tools with engaging formats and scripts for participating students. And these foundations really became more important than ever, as suddenly many students and the adults supporting their schooling were online for increased hours. More than ever, we really had to make the experience worth it. We also had to consider how to promote the work that we were doing. So to do so, we reviewed our goals for programming. the basis of that is as educators, we provide quality civics education as a foundation and demystify documents we hold and often ways in which the public can access them. So next slide, please. So supporting educators and incorporating our documents into classroom use is an additional component of this accessibility. Students' ability to understand their history and a fluid comfort in working with primary sources creates informed citizens. We really believe it's not our role as educators at the National Archives to direct students or even teachers with how to think about the documents. But it is a fundamental goal of our distance learning program for historical contextualization of the records and methods for researching connected documents and history that will help students feel confident in making their own informed decisions about the primary sources in history. And as a result, current events and civic responsibility. Next slide, please. And so these are goals we aim to reach in all levels of our programming. So this is an example of one of our earlier elementary programs. It's called the Superhero Bill of Rights. We explore rights protected by the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights through our elementary program. This is aimed towards 3rd through 5th graders. So that's approximately 8 through 11-year-olds. We scaffold the questions and the lead ups to ask, how is the Bill of Rights like a superhero? So often we get answers, we ask the question, how would you describe a superhero? And people will say helpful, brave, protect people. How does the Bill of Rights protect us and our rights and empower us in our ability to exercise these rights? So next slide, please. So we do this through document analysis. In this program, we have a mix of textual and photographic materials. And we lead students through document analysis using these documents from our holdings and work with them to identify the First Amendment right illustrated in each record. So this photo is of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In his March for Civil Rights. And so we would ask, you see those rights from the First Amendment on the side, and we'd help children really break down the photo. So we would ask, what do they observe? There are pre-program activities that we would give to teachers in a packet, but we find that teachers, the classroom is shifting day to day in the United States with COVID. Some students are learning from school, some students are learning from home. And that really, depending on where in the country they are, changes week to week. So we've tried to revise the program so that, the pre-program activities we would otherwise be doing that would help the teacher introduce these ideas aren't as necessary, so that it doesn't exclude classrooms who might want to participate in this and put up additional hurdles for teachers who are faced with so many new challenges this year. So with this photo, and next slide, please, we would have the children hopefully reach the freedom of speech. And they might mention, well, it looks like the person is speaking. He's at a podium. There are microphones. So really looking at the close details of this image. The next slide, please. As Missy was saying, we do also have preschool programs. We have recently launched our Young Learners program. Through conversation with historical reenactors, we introduce history and individuals represented in the holdings of the National Archives through this interactive online program. As part of this, we also try to develop complementary activities through Docs Teach. So this comes as a whole package, so families can participate just in the interactive programs if they would like to, or if educators would like to expand on it. There are supporting materials in Docs Teach as well. The next slide, please. So I think it's fair to say the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all areas of our programming from large to small. This is an example of perhaps one of our largest. As home to the founding documents of the United States, our Independence Day, or the 4th of July, is a major celebration at the National Archives. This photo on the left shows a typical celebration in years past of the day at the National Archives. You see that building we saw in the first slide. We host programs, historical reenactors, music, streamers. It's a very big event. Obviously, this was not to happen this year due to public health limitations. We had to find a way to still make the commemoration meaningful while pivoting to a fully online platform. So this past 4th of July 2020 marked our first ever completely virtual commemoration of the holiday. We had supplementary educational and family activities. So this is such as the coloring book you see on the right of the slide. We had online conversations between the Archivist of the United States, the Executive Director of our National Archives Foundation, and historical reenactors speaking of their experiences around Independence Day. We had educators leading viewers through a virtual tour of documents that spoke to where our country reached the goals set forth by the charters and where it may have fallen a little short. The comments received from the public were largely positive, and we were able to expand access to virtual attendees who would not otherwise have been able to travel to Washington, D.C. for the kind of usual in-person events. And I will say this is something that I think has been an unexpected professional positive from the pandemic. It really has made us even further consider how to best virtually reach people across the country and the world at the moment, and then expand those conversations to continue these broadened methods of access into a time when we return to in-person programming down the road. Missy and I and our colleagues are all still working from home at the moment, and we are working towards reopening, but we don't know exactly when that will be. Next slide, please. And it's just an example. Our social media channels are another great support to this work. So we have the 4th of July celebration, as well as our Young Learners program are broadcast on our YouTube channel. We have over 14 social media platforms, and I would really encourage you to check them out, because I think they're great ways of connecting with the documents and programs through our education platforms. There are great dialogues with teachers. Teachers are tagging us in them and showing them using the Docs Teach activities, and students with distance learning programs. We're really able to have expanded conversations with the public, and it's really great to see people, and particularly classrooms, using these documents and all the creative ways that they're doing so. So next slide, please. So these are other ways to connect with us. And so thank you very much for your time today. We really enjoyed connecting with you. I don't know if there's time for questions, but Missy and I are happy to take some if there are. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and yeah, we're available for questions now.
Wow.
Are there any? Rachel, you'll feed us the questions?
Yeah, I've got some questions already for you. But first of all, I want to say thank you so much for an informative and enlightening presentation. That's twice I'm jealous on one day. That's not good. The size of your task, preschool children, that's amazing. And your success in fulfilling your goals is really admirable. The online exhibitions were very interesting. And also the fact that 95% of your records are already recorded at a series level is amazing, very impressive. I just want to say that the National Archive of Japan specifically mentioned the Docs Teach website as a model for them. That was interesting. I just said a bit in Hebrew, okay, and then I'll open for questions. תודה רבה מיסי ושרה על הפרזנטציה העשירה ומאירת העיניים שלכם. גודל המשימה שלכם, גם לילדי גן לדוגמה, אבל כל ארצות הברית, ממש מרשים. בהצלחה בהנגשת השגת הילדים שלכם, ראויות להערצה. התערוכות כמובן מוכוונים, הן מאוד מתאימות לתקופה הזאת. העובדה ש-95% של הרשומות הן כבר רשומות ברמת הסדרה, בארכיון לאומי, מאוד מרשים. ורק שהאתר של הדוקסטק זה אחד האתרים שהארכיון הלאומי של יפן מתייחס אליו ונעזר בו. זה מעניין. So I have questions, a couple of questions here. I'll open to Missy and Sarah and also to Andrew. First question from Lavi. How do you plan to enlarge the number of pupils and students familiar with archival material in the archive itself at the end of COVID? Andrew, do you want to start? Yeah.
Okay, so we are physically increasing the space that we have available. So for the past 17 years, or the first 17 years of our program, we had one education room. For the past 3 years, we've now had 2 education rooms. We are just bringing online 2 more education rooms, and we've just received £500,000 of funding from a charity to create additional learning spaces as well. So we hope to end up eventually with 5 spaces, learning spaces dedicated for school students and for community use as well. And we are also looking to develop a dedicated digital learning lab that will allow us to expand our connection with students. In addition to that, we are developing an outreach to schools program where we will physically, and I want to take real documents out. That's an argument I've yet to win, rather than just facsimiles, but I want to take real documents out into schools if possible. So we are piloting an outreach program with local schools, and eventually we want that to become a national program. We recently launched the National Archives Trust, which is very similar to the Foundation for the National Archives in the US, which is a charitable trust that will raise funds specifically for expanding the education and engagement programs that we have at the National Archives in the UK. So we have a very, very ambitious target over the next 5 years to expand from 15,000 students and 2,000 teachers to 40,000 students and 4,000 teachers that we work with every year.
Wow.
Yes. Well, you want me to jump in with DC?
Please do.
We have this amazing Boeing Learning Center in Washington, D.C. And Andrew, have you been there? I know folks from you came a few years ago when Leanne Potter was there. Yes? Okay.
Yes.
And we, quite honestly, we are booked most of the time with programs, especially for students. That is very, very popular. I think we would quite honestly need more staff to expand our program, and I'm not sure that is going to happen. So I think that when we finally reopen, I think it's going to be next fall before the groups start to come again. I think we're going to have all we can handle. We actually get over 1 million visitors to the National Archives Museum every year. Obviously, not all of those are students, but we do get lots of student groups. And we don't do quite as many teacher workshops, and I think I'd like to see that expand more, at least in the building. We do I don't know, Sarah, if you know the numbers for that, but we are able to connect with thousands of teachers each year virtually, and COVID has only expanded that. I mean, as I call it, it's one of what I call the silver linings in the COVID cloud, that we've reached that. And I did a Young Learners program a couple weeks ago with a reenactor of President Lincoln, who was talking about the 1863 Thanksgiving Proclamation. It was on YouTube, and it's had, over 3,000 views, which is just something I would never, ever have with a preschool program in the building. Although it's, that's something I want to continue as well. So I don't know, Sarah, anything else jump in with?
No, I second everything you've both said. I will say, just thinking about how we reach people online, I think is great and something we'll continue. We didn't have time to mention it in here, but we, in partnership with our foundation, we host sleepovers every year. And there is a fee because it's run through the foundation as a fundraiser, but people come and they sleep in the rotunda. But this past year, I think it was last month, Missy, we had our
it was
first,
in October. Yeah,
in October,
virtual.
Our first virtual one. And it was great because we were able to kind of take away that hurdle of payment for participating. So it really made it a little more possible for other people to come. You didn't have to be in Washington, D.C., so people who weren't able to travel could still participate in it. And it's really, I think it's opened the possibility and the conversations we've been having internally with just looking at all the programs we offer and thinking, what are we doing? What are we doing well? What can we do better? And what can we kind of reevaluate in these programs so there aren't kind of unnecessary complications and hurdles for participating, so that really they're open to anyone who would like to participate, which, you know, is our goal, and definitely our goal as a federal agency. So like Missy said, that really has it's been a benefit of this time to let us kind of think about that and really give us a moment to reevaluate how we're connecting with the public and how we can do that better.
Could I just add to that, actually, because that's exactly our experience, that if we hadn't have closed the archives for 3 months and forced us to rethink and what we do and how we do it and how we can engage with students and continue to engage with them. If we hadn't been forced to do that, then looking back, I think we should have done it because you know, there's nothing like a crisis really to really make you think hard about what you're doing and what's valuable and how you do it. And it's been a really beneficial experience for us. And sometimes, you know, I think as Missy says, you know, there's a real silver lining to these clouds, and you know, sometimes it's actually worth just experimenting with things, and you know, don't wait for a global pandemic to force you to do these things. Maybe just try them out anyway.
Definitely.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to take advantage of my my status as the facilitator here, just to ask both of you, how big are your education staffs? I mean, you make it sound like there are hundreds of people running around and facilitating all this. How many people do you actually have working with you?
Andrew, you start, because I've got to count.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that many, but I just want to make sure.
So we have actually just added 2 additional members of staff. So my whole department for education and community outreach is 14. We've that's just gone from 12 to 14 this month. We've added 2 digital project officers to that, which is as a result of our transferring everything online. We had 2 in our digital web team who were really struggling to keep up with the demand that the rest of the team were producing for them. So we currently have 4 working on digital projects, 3 working in community outreach, and 6 working in the teaching team. And then I tend to focus more on working directly with teachers and with archivists. So it's a team of 14 in total.
We have 15 technically, but not all of them are educators. So 2 of them are really just public programs. I guess Dorothy does both in New York. And then we have museum folks. We have a couple people who are part of the team who really, their job is for just visitor services. So that really takes us down to about 9 people, because our supervisor is supervising, and we are stretched pretty thin, I would say. We are really, I would love to see more people. Oh, we also have 2 people who are mostly volunteer coordinators who are part of the team. So we all pitch in, do a lot, right, Sarah? So we're not a big team. When we come back, when we reopen, I know that you all have a lot of programs in New York, and that's the other thing. Not everybody's in DC, and not even close. Yeah. In fact, in DC, there are really just 2.5 of us, which is crazy, to meet the demands of, especially as I know the schools will come back. So that's not something that I have much control over beyond talking to my supervisor and say, I think we need to do this. But then, their budgets, and it's not anyone's, to be perfectly honest, I don't think it's anyone's priority right now. So I don't know, Sarah, what do you think?
I would say typically, as Missy said, in New York, it's myself and another full-time educator. I'm split between education and curating the on-site exhibits in New York. Then we have a public programs person who does public programs and education programs. Between the 3 of us, in kind of typical pre-COVID times, I would say we would probably have between, I don't know, 3 to 6 education programs on site per week in terms of classes, and maybe 2 to 4 public programs a month on site. This really, as we've moved online, it's changed. Something I wanted to mention that I omitted before: we don't charge for any of our programs either. So schools contact us, and either in person or online, we then connect with them for the field trip. So it really, like Missy said, we all wear several hats, as I think all of us do as educators and archivists. But we're not a big staff, but we really, we try and meet the need, and we try and meet the requests, particularly from schools. So like later today, I have 1 student program, and my distance learning counterpart I know has 2 for schools. So every day, days are busy, but they're really interesting. So it's a good place to be.
Oh, thank you very much.